Leave this house. Tonight.
You would send me away like this?
Ma'am, please come with us. Ma'am, please keep moving.
Where am I supposed to go?
Why does this feel so wrong?
We'll survive this. I promise.
The cold rain washed away every trace of dignity as a frightened young maid clutched her pregnant belly outside the towering mansion. Moments earlier, billionaire Sanele Dlamini had ordered security to throw her out, refusing to believe the child she carried was his. With nowhere to go and no one willing to listen, she collapsed on the roadside while the gates slowly closed behind her. Sanele believed he had buried a scandal forever. He had no idea that the woman he abandoned and the little life she carried would one day become the greatest regret of his entire existence. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is in your country. Share your location in the comments below. And if you enjoy heartfelt stories about hope, justice, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our next journey together. Johannesburg woke before the sun. Long before luxury offices lit up with polished chandeliers and expensive coffee machines, thousands of ordinary people were already filling crowded taxis, sweeping storefronts, stocking supermarket shelves, and preparing breakfast for families who would never learn their names. Every shining skyscraper in Santon stood because countless invisible hands worked tirelessly behind the scenes. One of those invisible hands belonged to 24-year-old Nomsa Khumalo. Every weekday she left the small two-room house she rented in Soweto before dawn. The tiny home was shared with her widowed mother, Thandi Khumalo, whose kidneys had begun to fail, and her 16-year-old brother, Sifo, who dreamed of becoming an engineer one day. Their home was simple but spotless. The paint had faded years ago, and the roof leaked whenever summer storms arrived, yet Nomsa refused to complain. Every evening she cleaned every corner before sleeping, because she believed that poverty was painful enough without allowing hopelessness to settle inside the house as well. Her salary as a housemaid barely covered medicine food school fees, electricity, and transport. There was never enough. Still, she smiled every morning. Her mother often asked why. Nomsa always answered the same way. One day will worry about itself. Today still deserves a smile. That sentence became the quiet strength holding their family together. Every morning she traveled nearly 2 hours by taxi before arriving at the enormous Dlamini estate, one of the most admired private residences in Johannesburg. The mansion looked less like a home and more like a luxury hotel. Tall glass walls reflected the morning sunlight. Perfect gardens surrounded elegant fountains. Luxury vehicles rested quietly inside an enormous garage. Security guards monitored every entrance, while gardeners carefully trimmed flowers that seemed to bloom all year. To most people, the estate represented unimaginable wealth. To Nomsa, it represented opportunity. She knew that one mistake could cost her the job that kept her family alive. She never arrived late. She never argued. She never wasted food. She treated every room with the same care she would have given her own home if she had possessed one. Most of the staff respected her because she never spoke badly about anyone. If another employee made a mistake, Nomsa quietly helped fix it instead of reporting it. "Kindness returns eventually," she often whispered. Few people believed her. The owner of the estate rarely noticed such things. Sanele Dlamini was only 38. Yet, business magazines already called him one of South Africa's most successful entrepreneurs. He owned construction companies, renewable energy projects, logistics businesses, and affordable housing developments across several African countries. Newspapers described him as brilliant. Television called him disciplined. Business rivals called him impossible to defeat. Employees simply called him demanding. His daily routine never changed. He woke before sunrise. He exercised. He reviewed financial reports during breakfast. He attended meetings from morning until evening. Every minute of his day had a purpose. Every decision relied on logic instead of emotion. Few people realized this discipline had been built from childhood pain. Sanele had grown up watching his father lose everything after trusting relatives who cared more about money than family. When his parents died within 2 years of each other, success became his shield against vulnerability. He believed emotions weakened judgment. Trust created disappointment. Distance created safety. Only his elderly aunt, Sanele Dlamini, remained close to him after his parents' deaths. She had helped raise him and managed many personal matters inside the household. Everyone assumed she loved him unconditionally. No one questioned the influence she held over every corner of his private life. Inside the mansion, Sanele rarely noticed individual employees. Housekeepers blended into the background. Gardeners became part of the landscape. Drivers opened doors without expecting conversation. He greeted people politely but briefly. Professional distance had become second nature. Everything might have continued exactly that way, if not for one unexpected morning. Sanele entered the dining room while reading messages on his tablet. Without looking up, he reached for his selfie. The cup was empty. The kitchen staff had become distracted by an electrical problem. Before anyone could react, Nomsa quietly walked over. She poured fresh coffee without interrupting his work. She noticed he had skipped breakfast. Instead of speaking, she simply placed fresh fruit and warm whole-grain toast beside his coffee before returning to polishing the dining table. Several minutes later, Sanele finally looked up. "You noticed?" Nomsa stopped. "I'm sorry, sir. I usually forget breakfast." She smiled politely. "You work better when you eat." It was such an ordinary sentence that Sanele almost laughed. Nobody had spoken to him like that in years. Not as a billionaire. Not as an employer. Simply as another human being. He nodded once. "Thank you." Nomsa quietly returned to work. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Yet something strangely unfamiliar remained with Sanele throughout the day. Someone had noticed his well-being without asking for anything. Weeks passed. Small moments slowly accumulated. One rainy afternoon, Sanele returned unexpectedly after a difficult meeting. His expensive suit was soaked because he had insisted on walking from the driveway without an umbrella. Most employees had already gone home. As he entered the hallway, he noticed water spreading across the marble floor. The roof above an older section of the house had begun leaking after heavy rain. Nomsa stood alone beneath the dripping ceiling. Instead of protecting expensive furniture first, she carefully moved several framed family photographs away from the water. One picture slipped from her hands. She caught it before the glass touched the floor. Sanele recognized the photograph immediately. It showed him as a young boy standing beside his late parents. Few people inside the mansion even knew that picture existed. "You protected the photographs first," he said quietly. Nomsa looked embarrassed. "They cannot be replaced. The furniture costs far more." She gently shook her head. "Furniture can be bought again." She carefully dried the frame with a soft cloth. "Memories cannot." For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Sanele stared at the photograph in silence. Most visitors admired the mansion. Nomsa had noticed the family instead. That difference stayed with him long after she returned the picture to its place. From then on, he began noticing her more often. She greeted every employee by name. She carried groceries for the elderly cook without being asked. She secretly left portions of untouched food for the security guards working overnight shifts. She laughed easily with the gardeners. She never complained about overtime. She worked with quiet dignity that money could neither create nor purchase. Meanwhile, Nomsa knew very little about the man whose house she cleaned. She only saw someone who looked permanently exhausted. Sometimes she noticed untouched dinners. Sometimes she found business files scattered across the library at 2 in the morning. Sometimes she heard him pacing alone on the upstairs balcony, long after everyone else had gone to bed. The mansion was filled with priceless artwork, rare antiques, and luxury beyond imagination, yet somehow it felt lonely. Neither of them realized that these quiet observations were slowly breaking down walls built over many years, not through romance, not through intention, simply through the rare comfort of being seen. Outside, Johannesburg continued rushing through another ordinary season. Inside the Dlamini estate, two lives from completely different worlds had begun moving toward a future neither of them could possibly imagine. The weeks slipped by almost unnoticed, yet something subtle had changed inside the Dlamini estate. Nothing improper happened. No whispered conversations filled the hallways. No lingering glances passed between Sanele and Nomsa. The household staff saw exactly what they had always seen: a billionaire devoted to his work and a young maid devoted to her responsibilities. Yet beneath that ordinary routine, two lonely people had quietly begun recognizing each other's humanity. Sanele found himself saying "good morning" instead of merely nodding. Sometimes he even asked whether Nomsa's mother was feeling better after medical treatments. He never asked out of obligation. He genuinely wanted to know. Nomsa, however, never took advantage of his kindness. She never requested financial help. She never hinted at needing a salary increase. She never tried to become more important than the other employees. If anything, she became even more careful to maintain professional boundaries. She understood how quickly gossip could destroy a woman's reputation, especially a poor woman's. One Friday afternoon, Sanele returned from Cape Town after a week of exhausting negotiations. The business deal had been celebrated across financial newspapers. Investors praised him. Television hosts admired him. Share prices climbed. Yet when his private car entered the estate, he felt no satisfaction, only fatigue. The mansion greeted him with perfect silence. As always, he walked into his study, removed his jacket, and stared at a framed photograph on the bookshelf. It showed his parents standing beside him when he was 12 years old. His father smiled confidently. His mother rested one hand on his shoulder. The photograph had been taken only months before both of their lives changed forever. Sanele reached toward the frame, but stopped halfway. He still could not bring himself to touch it. Some grief never completely disappeared. That evening, he canceled dinner with business partners and remained alone inside the library. He worked until nearly midnight before finally rubbing his tired eyes. His head throbbed, his vision blurred. Without realizing it, he had skipped both lunch and dinner again. When he stood up too quickly, dizziness forced him back into his chair. At that exact moment, someone knocked softly. "Come in." The door opened carefully. Nomsa stepped inside carrying a small tray. "I noticed the kitchen lights were still on, sir." She hesitated. "I thought you might not have eaten." Sanele looked at the tray. Homemade vegetable soup, fresh bread, warm rooibos tea. Nothing expensive, nothing elaborate, just comfort. "I didn't ask for this." "I know." She smiled gently. But sometimes people need food before they realize they're hungry. For a second, Sanele almost refused. Old habits told him accepting kindness created unnecessary attachment. Instead, he quietly picked up the spoon. The soup was simple, yet somehow it reminded him of childhood. "My mother used to make something similar," he said without thinking. Nomsa froze. It was the first personal thing he had ever shared. "I'm sure she made it better." A faint smile crossed his face. "She probably did." Silence settled comfortably between them. Not awkward, not forced, simply peaceful. As Nomsa turned to leave, Sanele spoke again. "Thank you." She nodded once before disappearing into the hallway. Neither realized that several meters away, another pair of eyes had witnessed everything. Sanele Dlamini, She stood partially hidden near the staircase. Her expression remained calm, but her thoughts did not. She had managed Sanele's household for years. She knew every routine, every habit, every weakness. She immediately noticed something dangerous. For the first time since his parents died, Sanele had allowed someone inside the emotional walls, protecting his heart. She disliked it instantly. The following days became unusually busy. A multinational investment conference was approaching. Executives from Europe, Asia, and across Africa would attend. The Dlamini estate transformed into headquarters for non-stop meetings. Employees rushed everywhere. Drivers arrived and departed constantly. Phones never stopped ringing. Nomsa worked longer hours helping prepare guest rooms and formal dinners. Despite the chaos, she remained cheerful. Late one evening, while carrying fresh flowers toward the conference room, she heard raised voices inside. The door remained slightly open. She never intended to listen. But Sanele's voice stopped her. "I've already said no." Another man answered sharply. "The board expects expansion." "They expect profit." "They're not the same thing." The discussion grew louder. One executive accused Sanele of becoming too cautious. Another questioned his leadership. Someone even hinted that shareholders might begin losing confidence. Nearly an hour later, the meeting ended. Executives left wearing frustrated expressions. Sanele remained alone. He looked exhausted. Nomsa quietly placed the flowers on the nearby table and started leaving. "You heard some of that." She stopped. "Only a little." "What do you think?" The question surprised both of them. Why would one of the richest businessmen in South Africa ask a maid for her opinion? Nomsa answered carefully. "I don't understand business." He waited. "But I understand people." He leaned back. "Go on." "If everyone is pushing you to move faster." She hesitated. "Maybe they're thinking about money." "And you seemed to be thinking about consequences." Sanele studied her face. She continued quietly. "My mother always says fast decisions can earn money." She smiled softly. "But slow decisions can protect sleep." For several seconds he said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just honestly. It had been months since anyone inside the mansion had heard that sound. "You know," he admitted, "my advisors charge a great deal for advice." Nomsa looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry if I spoke out of turn." "No." He shook his head. "You reminded me why I built my company." That conversation stayed with him long after she walked away. The conference ended successfully 2 days later. Investors praised Sanele's careful strategy. Even critics admitted he had made the wiser decision. Still, he remembered Nomsa's words more clearly than the boardroom presentations. Slow decisions can protect sleep. For the first time in years, he slept peacefully. Meanwhile, life outside the mansion delivered painful news. Nomsa received a phone call while cleaning the upstairs hallway. Her mother's condition had suddenly worsened. Doctors recommended immediate treatment that would cost far more than the family could afford. Nomsa excused herself and quietly cried inside the laundry room. She believed no one had seen. She was wrong. Sanele happened to pass the open doorway. He stopped immediately. He had never seen her cry before. "What happened?" She quickly wiped away her tears. "It's nothing, sir." "It doesn't look like nothing." "My mother's kidneys." Her voice broke. "The doctors want to begin another treatment." She lowered her eyes. "I don't know how I'll pay." Without hesitation, Sanele reached for his phone. "I know a specialist at Mill Park Hospital." Nomsa looked shocked. "No, sir. This isn't charity." He interrupted gently. "It's health care. I'll arrange an appointment. I can repay." You don't have to. She stared at him, unable to speak. No wealthy employer had ever treated her family's suffering as something worth noticing, not because she was an employee, but because she was human. Neither of them realized that this simple act of compassion would become the turning point neither had expected. Sometimes destiny does not arrive with dramatic music or impossible coincidence. Sometimes it begins with a bowl of soup, a quiet conversation, and one decision to care about another person's pain. Neither Sanele nor Nomsa understood that their growing trust was leading them toward a single night that would change both of their lives forever. Winter settled over Johannesburg with crisp mornings and long, quiet evenings. For the first time in months, Sanele allowed himself to slow down. His company's largest international project had been completed successfully, and although meetings still filled his calendar, he no longer worked until dawn every night. The doctors treating Nomsa Khumalo had also delivered encouraging news. Thanks to early treatment, her condition had stabilized. Nomsa thanked God every morning. She also thanked Sanele, though never in ways that drew attention. She simply worked harder. If a meeting ran late, dinner was ready. If guests arrived unexpectedly, every room was spotless. If the elderly gardener struggled with heavy equipment, she quietly helped before anyone noticed. She wanted no special treatment. She only wanted to honor the kindness that had saved her mother's life. One afternoon, Sanele happened to overhear two junior employees talking in the kitchen. "I heard Mr. Dlamini paid for someone's hospital consultation. He probably doesn't even remember. He never tells anyone when he helps." Sanele quietly walked away before they noticed him. He disliked praise. His parents had taught him that generosity spoken aloud became performance. Generosity kept private remained compassion. That lesson stayed with him. Yet despite the growing peace inside the mansion, another pair of eyes watched every interaction carefully. Sanele Dlamini. She noticed every conversation, every polite smile, every moment when Sanele seemed less guarded around Nomsa. It disturbed her. She had spent years convincing herself that emotions only distracted powerful men. Now she feared someone she considered insignificant was changing Sanele in ways she could not control. One evening she invited him to tea. "You've been different lately." Sanele looked up from his newspaper. "Different? You smile more." "I didn't realize smiling required permission." She forced a laugh. "I'm simply curious." "There isn't much to explain." Sanele stirred her tea slowly. "People notice who influences successful men." Sanele folded the newspaper. "No one influences my decisions." "I hope that's true." She let the sentence hang in the air before changing the subject. Sanele thought little of the conversation. Sanele thought about nothing else. A week later, Sanele received devastating news. His oldest friend and business mentor, Themba Nkosi, suffered a sudden heart attack while traveling overseas. Themba had helped build Sanele's first company. More importantly, he had become the closest thing to family after Sanele lost his parents. Despite emergency surgery, Themba passed away 2 days later. The funeral was held outside Durban. Thousands attended. Business leaders praised his achievements. Employees cried openly. Sanele stood silently beside the coffin throughout the ceremony. He spoke only a few sentences. He believed success meant lifting others. His voice remained steady. "But today I realize I never thanked him enough." When the funeral ended, everyone returned to their own lives. Sanele returned to Johannesburg carrying something heavier than grief: regret. He spent the following days wandering through his enormous mansion, unable to concentrate. Business reports remained unread. Phone calls went unanswered. Meals sat untouched. At night, he barely slept. Every room reminded him how quickly life disappeared. One evening, rain began falling across the city. The staff finished their duties and quietly left. Only a few employees remained inside the mansion. Nomsa noticed lights still burning inside the library well after 10 o'clock. She hesitated outside the door. Then she knocked softly. No answer. She opened the door slightly. Sanele sat alone before the fireplace. The fire had nearly burned out. An untouched glass of water rested beside him. He wasn't reading. He wasn't working. He simply stared into the fading flames. "I'm sorry." Nomsa immediately stepped backward. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "You didn't." His voice sounded unusually tired. She noticed several framed photographs lying on the table. Old family pictures. Themba appeared in many of them. "You were close." Sanele nodded. "He believed in me before anyone else did." Silence returned. Nomsa remained near the doorway. "I lost my father when I was 11, she said quietly. Sanele looked toward her. "For a long time, I thought crying made me weak." She smiled sadly. "My mother told me something I'll never forget." "What?" "Love always leaves pain behind." She paused. "If it hurts this much, it means you were blessed enough to love someone deeply." The room fell completely silent. Those words reached somewhere Sanele had protected for years. He lowered his eyes. "I've spent most of my life trying not to feel pain." "And has it worked?" He answered honestly, "No." Nomsa stepped closer to place another piece of wood onto the dying fire. The flames slowly returned. "You don't have to stop loving people because losing them hurts." She looked at the growing fire. "Otherwise, grief wins twice." Sanele watched the flames dance across the fireplace. Nobody had spoken to him with such simple honesty since his mother died. Not an executive, not an investor, not a relative, only a young woman whose life looked nothing like his own. Without thinking, he whispered, "I'm tired." The confession surprised him. Successful men were expected to be strong, powerful, certain, not tired. Nomsa answered gently, "Then rest." He gave a faint smile. "I've forgotten how." She smiled back. "My mother says even the strongest tree bends when the wind is too heavy." Neither moved. The rain continued falling outside. Lightning briefly illuminated the room. The mansion felt strangely peaceful. Neither intended for anything beyond that conversation. Neither crossed a boundary. They simply sat in shared silence while grief slowly became lighter. Hours later, the electricity suddenly failed. The entire estate went dark. A powerful storm had damaged nearby power lines. Emergency generators required several minutes to activate. The library disappeared into complete darkness. Instinctively, Nomsa reached forward. "So you don't trip," she whispered. Her hand found Sanele's. For just a moment. Nothing more. The generators restarted. Warm light returned. Their hands separated immediately. Both stepped back. Embarrassment filled the room. "I'm sorry," Nomsa said quickly. "So am I." Neither fully understood why they were apologizing. Perhaps because something invisible had changed. Perhaps because loneliness had made two wounded hearts forget the distance that should always exist. Nomsa quietly excused herself and left. Sanele remained standing before the fireplace for a long time. He replayed the evening again and again. Nothing improper had happened. Yet he knew the emotional boundaries between employer and employee had become dangerously blurred. Over the following week, they deliberately avoided being alone together. Conversations became shorter, professional, careful. Both believed distance would solve everything. Then came the annual Dlamini Foundation Charity Gala. The event lasted late into the evening. After hundreds of guests finally departed, only a handful of staff remained cleaning the mansion. Near midnight, exhausted from days of preparation, Nomsa nearly collapsed from fatigue while carrying heavy decorations. Sanele happened to see her lose her balance. He rushed forward and caught her before she hit the floor. She looked up. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. Months of loneliness, shared grief, mutual respect, unspoken gratitude. Every emotion they had carefully buried suddenly surfaced at once. In one moment of emotional weakness, they embraced. Neither planned it, neither expected it. Neither realized how profoundly that single mistake would change the course of both their lives. Neither Sanele nor Nomsa spoke as the first rays of sunlight slipped through the tall windows of the mansion. The silence between them felt heavier than any conversation could have been. What had happened the previous night was never planned. It had not begun with secret meetings, hidden messages, or a forbidden romance. It had grown from months of shared loneliness, grief, gratitude, and emotional vulnerability that neither of them had fully understood until it was too late. Nomsa gathered herself first. "I should go." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Sanele nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "I'm sorry." "So am I." Those were the only words they exchanged. When Nomsa left the room, both believed the painful mistake would remain buried forever. Life inside the Dlamini estate quickly returned to its familiar rhythm. Sanele buried himself in work with even greater intensity than before. He accepted every business trip available. He stayed late at the office. He avoided breakfast at home whenever possible. Every decision was an attempt to silence his conscience. Nomsa did the same in her own way. She requested additional duties. She switched schedules whenever possible. She avoided working alone in areas where Sanele might appear. The distance was deliberate, painful, necessary. Weeks slowly passed. Then one quiet Sunday morning, everything changed. Nomsa sat alone inside the small bathroom of her family's home in Soweto. Her hands trembled as she stared at the pregnancy test resting on the sink. She checked it once, then twice, then a third time. The answer never changed. Positive. She slowly lowered herself onto the floor. Tears filled her eyes, not because she hated the child, but because she immediately understood what this would mean. A poor, unmarried housemaid, pregnant, carrying the child of one of South Africa's most powerful businessmen. Who would believe her? Who would protect her? How could she explain something that even sounded impossible? She pressed both hands against her face and cried silently so her mother would not hear. Later that evening, Thandi noticed something was wrong. "You've hardly eaten." "I'm just tired." "You've been tired for days." Nomsa forced a smile. "It's work." Thandi watched her daughter carefully. A mother often recognized pain long before words appeared. But she chose not to press further. When someone was ready, they would speak. 3 more weeks passed. Morning sickness became impossible to hide. Nomsa struggled to complete simple household tasks. The elderly cook eventually noticed. "You don't look well." "I'm fine." "You nearly fainted while carrying groceries." "I'm only exhausted." The cook frowned, but said nothing. Inside the mansion, Sanele also began noticing small changes. Nomsa looked pale. She worked more slowly. Sometimes she stopped briefly, taking quiet breaths before continuing. One afternoon, he found her sitting alone in the garden after finishing her duties. "You should go home early." She immediately stood. "I'm fine, sir." "No." He studied her face. "You aren't." She lowered her eyes. "I'll manage." "You don't always have to." His kindness only made speaking harder. That night, Nomsa finally made her decision. She could not continue hiding the truth. Whatever happened afterward, at least Sanele deserved to know. The following evening, she knocked on the study door. "Come in." Sanele looked up from financial reports. Seeing her expression, he immediately closed the file. "What happened?" Nomsa remained standing. Her hands shook uncontrollably. "I needed to tell you something." He gestured toward the chair. "You can sit." "I'd rather stand." Several long seconds passed. Finally, she whispered, "I'm pregnant." The room became completely silent. Sanele stared at her. The words reached his ears. His mind refused to accept them. "What did you say?" She swallowed. "I'm carrying a baby." He slowly stood. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Sanele spoke almost mechanically. "Are you certain?" "Yes." "Have you seen a doctor?" She nodded. "I went yesterday." He turned toward the window. Outside, the gardens remained perfectly peaceful. Inside, everything felt as though it had begun collapsing. His breathing became uneven. The single night they had both tried desperately to forget had suddenly become impossible to escape. Neither spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, Sanele asked the question he already knew the answer to. "Is the child—" He couldn't finish. Nomsa looked directly at him. "I have never been with anyone else." The sentence landed like a stone. Sanele closed his eyes. He believed her. That was precisely what frightened him. His carefully controlled life suddenly stood on the edge of scandal. Newspapers, shareholders, business rivals, board members, his family's reputation. Everything flashed through his mind at once. "I need time," Nomsa nodded slowly. "I understand. I don't know what to think. I'm not asking you to decide today." She took a slow breath. "I only wanted you to know." She quietly left the study. Sanele remained frozen where he stood. For the first time in years, logic offered no answers, only fear. Unfortunately, someone else had seen Nomsa leaving the study in tears. Sanele. She waited until late that evening before entering Sanele's office. "You seem troubled." "I'm fine." "You've never lied well." He sighed deeply. "I have a situation." "What kind?" Sanele hesitated. He had trusted his aunt since childhood. She had always appeared to protect him. Finally, he spoke. "Nomsa is pregnant." Sanele remained perfectly still. Inside, however, her thoughts raced. She hid every trace of satisfaction. "And she says, 'The child is mine.'" A long silence followed. Then Sanele slowly shook her head. "My poor boy. You don't believe her." "I believe she's clever." Sanele frowned. "Nomsa isn't manipulative. You've known her for months. I've known desperate people my entire life." She leaned forward. "Think carefully. You're wealthy. She's poor. What would the world assume?" Sanele remained silent. Sanele continued speaking softly, almost kindly. "The timing is convenient." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that powerful men become targets." "I don't think she'd lie." "You don't think," she interrupted gently. "You hope." The distinction unsettled him. For the next several days, Sanele quietly planted seeds of doubt. Never direct accusations, only questions. "Did anyone see you together? What if this becomes public? What if investors lose confidence? What if she's being influenced by someone?" Every conversation ended the same way. "I'm only trying to protect you." Sanele wanted to reject her fears. Yet fear has a dangerous habit of growing once it enters the mind. He stopped sleeping again. Board meetings became unbearable. Simple decisions felt impossible. Every time he thought about Nomsa's frightened face, guilt overwhelmed him. Every time he imagined newspaper headlines, panic replaced guilt. Meanwhile, Nomsa waited. She expected uncertainty. She expected difficult conversations. She never expected silence. Days became weeks. Sanele called no meetings. He offered no answers. He simply withdrew into himself. One evening, Nomsa stood alone in the servants' quarters, resting a trembling hand over her stomach. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring," she whispered, "but I promise." A tear rolled down her cheek. "I'll protect you." Unbeknownst to her, just across the mansion, Sanele opened a locked drawer inside her private bedroom. She removed several documents. Among them was the appointment confirmation from Mill Park Hospital that Sanele had arranged months earlier for Thandi's treatment. She looked at the papers thoughtfully before placing them into the fireplace. The flames quickly consumed every page. As the last corner turned to ash, Sanele quietly murmured, "Some truths must disappear before they have the chance to ruin everything." Neither Sanele nor Nomsa had any idea that the greatest threat to their future was no longer fear. It was someone who had already decided that their child should never have a place in the Dlamini family. The first warm winds of spring swept across Johannesburg, carrying the scent of blooming jacaranda trees through the city. For most people, it was a season of renewal. For Nomsa Khumalo, it became the beginning of the hardest chapter of her life. Nearly 2 weeks had passed since she told Sanele about the pregnancy. Every morning she arrived at the mansion, hoping he would ask to speak with her. Every evening she returned home carrying the same painful silence. He avoided her, not cruelly, not openly, but deliberately. If she cleaned the dining room, he chose breakfast in his office. If she worked upstairs, he remained downstairs. Whenever their paths crossed, he offered only a polite nod before walking away. The distance hurt far more than anger would have. Nomsa understood that Sanele was afraid. She only wished he would trust the man she believed he truly was. Unfortunately, someone else was working much faster. Sanele. She had spent years mastering the quiet art of manipulation. She never shouted. She never threatened. Instead, she slowly built a prison inside another person's mind until they believed the fear belonged to them. One evening, she invited Sanele into the private sitting room. The atmosphere was calm. Tea had already been prepared. She spoke as though discussing ordinary family matters. "Have you decided what to do?" Sanele rubbed his forehead. "I don't know anymore." "You do know." He looked at her. "You simply don't want to admit it." "What do you think I should admit?" Sanele sighed deeply. "You've built an empire with discipline. You've earned the respect of investors across Africa." She paused before continuing. "One scandal can destroy 20 years of work." Sanele remained silent. She leaned closer. "Imagine the headlines. Billionaire impregnates housemaid. Executive exploits domestic worker. Corporate leader faces public outrage." Each sentence landed like another stone on his conscience. Sanele watched his expression carefully. Then she lowered her voice. "And what if—" She hesitated deliberately. "The child isn't yours." Sanele looked up sharply. "I told you before." "I don't believe she'd lie." "I'm not accusing her." Sanele answered smoothly. "I'm asking whether certainty exists." There was only one night. One night you barely remember because both of you were emotionally exhausted. Sanele's confidence weakened. He hated himself for it, but fear had already begun poisoning reason. The following afternoon, he asked Nomsa to meet him inside the library. She entered with quiet hope. Perhaps today, everything would finally become clearer. Instead, she found a man who looked older than he had only weeks earlier. He stood beside the window with his back turned. "I've been thinking." "So have I." she answered softly. He took a slow breath. I'll provide financial support. Nomsa frowned. What? I'll make sure you have somewhere to live. I'll pay every medical expense. She stared at him in confusion. Sanele, but you cannot stay here. The room became silent. She blinked slowly. I don't understand. It would create too many questions. So you're asking me to resign? He hesitated. Yes. Nomsa felt her heart sink. I never asked for your money. I know. I asked for honesty. Sanele closed his eyes. This is the best solution. For whom? He had no answer. She stepped closer. Look at me. Slowly he did. Do you believe I'm lying? The question pierced him. He could not answer. Not because he believed she was dishonest, because he no longer trusted his own judgment. Nomsa understood immediately. Someone had filled his mind with doubt. Tears gathered in her eyes. You know me. I thought I did. The sentence broke something inside her. Months of trust vanished in an instant. I've cleaned your home. I cared for your family. I stood beside you when you buried your closest friend. Her voice trembled. And now you cannot even tell me whether you believe me. Sanele looked away. I don't know what to believe. Nomsa nodded slowly. Thank you. He frowned. For what? For finally telling me the truth. She wiped away a tear. You don't doubt me. You doubt yourself. Before he could answer, the library doors suddenly opened. Mazanelle entered without knocking. I apologize. Her voice sounded rehearsed. I didn't realize you were still speaking. She glanced briefly toward Nomsa before addressing Sanele. The journalists have arrived. Sanele nodded automatically. I'll be there. Nomsa understood. The conversation was over. She quietly walked toward the door. Just before leaving, she turned around one last time. I loved the man who helped my mother. She spoke calmly. I don't recognize the man standing here today. Then she disappeared into the hallway. Those words echoed inside Sanele's mind long after she had gone. 3 days later, Mazanelle made the final move. She arranged for several board members to visit the mansion unexpectedly. While they toured the property, she quietly suggested that one of the senior housemaids had become too emotionally attached to the owner. The rumor spread through the staff within hours. By evening, whispers filled every corner of the estate. Nomsa heard them. Some employees avoided eye contact. Others looked at her with pity. A few believed the gossip entirely. She had never felt so alone. That night, Sanele called the head of household management into his office. I want Nomsa's employment terminated. The manager looked shocked. Sir, prepare a generous severance package, effective immediately. The manager hesitated. Has she done something wrong? No. Then why? Please. Sanele interrupted quietly. Just do it. The older man lowered his head. As you wish. The next morning, Nomsa received the envelope. Inside were termination papers, several months' salary, and a letter offering financial assistance. She stared at the documents for a long time. Then she folded them carefully, without signing anything, without saying a word. She packed the few belongings she kept inside the servants' quarters. A family photograph, 2 books, an old knitted scarf her mother had made years earlier, nothing more. As she stepped outside, carrying one small suitcase, several employees silently watched from a distance. No one laughed, no one celebrated. Many looked ashamed. The elderly cook embraced her tightly. You deserve better than this. Nomsa smiled through tears. Take care of yourself. The old woman whispered. I will. At the front entrance, Sanele waited. His face revealed almost no emotion. That hurt Nomsa more than anything. He handed her another envelope. There's enough money to rent a place for several months. She looked down at it, then gently placed it back into his hands. I won't accept payment for my dignity. The sentence struck him harder than any accusation. You'll need help. My child needs a mother who can still stand with pride. She lifted her suitcase. I'll find another way. Before Sanele could respond, Mazanele appeared beside the front door. Her expression remained calm, almost satisfied. She gave a subtle signal to the security guards. The heavy iron gates slowly opened. Nomsa walked through them without looking back. Only when she reached the pavement outside did she allow herself to cry. Behind her, the gates slowly closed. With each metallic movement, it felt as though an entire chapter of her life was being sealed forever. Inside the mansion, Sanele stood frozen. His hand still held the unopened envelope. Something deep inside him screamed that he had made a terrible mistake. Yet fear, pride, and the lies whispered into his heart were louder. Outside the estate, Nomsa looked toward the endless road ahead. She placed one trembling hand over her unborn child. It will only be you and me now, she whispered through tears. I don't know where we'll sleep tonight, but I promise. Her voice cracked. I will never abandon you. Far behind her, inside the mansion she had just left forever, Sanele stared through the window until her figure disappeared into the distance. For reasons he could not explain, the house suddenly felt emptier than it ever had before. Nomsa walked for nearly an hour before she finally stopped. The suitcase in her hand felt heavier with every step, but it was not the weight of her belongings that exhausted her. It was the realization that she no longer had a place to return to. The afternoon sun was beginning to sink behind Johannesburg's skyline when she sat on a weathered bench outside a small community clinic. Around her, people hurried home from work, taxis honked impatiently, and children laughed while chasing one another through the dusty streets. Life continued. Her own seemed to have stopped. She reached into her handbag and counted the little money she had saved without touching the severance package she had refused. It was barely enough to pay rent for another month. Then there would be medicine for her mother, food, transport, doctor visits, a baby. She closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she had absolutely no plan. A gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. My child, are you all right? Nomsa looked up. An elderly woman wearing a faded blue church uniform stood beside the bench carrying 2 bags of groceries. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes radiated kindness. I'm fine. The woman smiled knowingly. No one cries like that when they're fine. Nomsa tried to wipe away the tears she hadn't realized were falling. I'm sorry. Don't apologize for being human. The elderly woman introduced herself as Mama Esther Mokoena, a retired nurse who volunteered at the nearby church. She sat beside Nomsa without asking another question. Sometimes silence was the greatest comfort. After several minutes, Nomsa quietly explained everything. Not every detail, only enough for another person to understand why her world had suddenly collapsed. Mama Esther listened without interruption. When Nomsa finished, the older woman simply held her hand. You still have your child. Nomsa nodded. You still have your mother. Another nod. You still have your character. Nomsa looked confused. What good is character when you've lost everything? Mama Esther smiled gently. My dear, you haven't lost everything. You've only lost people who failed to recognize your worth. Those words stayed with Nomsa long after they parted. That evening, Mama Esther helped her find a tiny room for rent behind a local grocery shop. It was even smaller than the house in Soweto. The ceiling leaked. The bed creaked loudly. The kitchen was shared with 3 other tenants. But it was safe. It was clean. It was enough. Nomsa moved in the next morning. Her mother insisted on leaving Soweto and joining her despite the cramped conditions. "We survived together," Thandi said firmly. "We've always survived together." Sifo also transferred to a nearby public school. No one complained. No one blamed Nomsa. They simply became a family fighting the same battle. Months passed. Nomsa found temporary work cleaning offices during the evenings and washing dishes at a neighborhood restaurant on weekends. Pregnancy made every shift more difficult. Her feet swelled. Her back constantly ached. Some mornings she vomited before leaving for work. Still, she never missed a shift. One rainy night, the restaurant manager noticed her struggling to lift heavy boxes. "You shouldn't be doing this. I need the job. You need rest. I need both." The manager, a kind middle-aged man named Jabulani Ndlovu, quietly assigned another employee to handle the heavy work. He never reduced her wages. He simply treated her with dignity. Nomsa never forgot that kindness. 7 months after leaving the Dlamini estate, labor pains began unexpectedly while she was cleaning tables after closing time. The pain struck so suddenly that she nearly collapsed. Jabulani rushed toward her. "We're going to the hospital." "I can take a taxi." "No." He shook his head. "My wife is already bringing the car." 40 minutes later, Nomsa lay inside the maternity ward of a crowded public hospital. The building was old. The hallways were noisy. Nurses hurried between rooms without stopping. No luxury surrounded her. Only ordinary people trying their best. The labor lasted nearly 12 hours. Thandi remained beside her the entire time, praying softly whenever another contraction came. Just before sunrise, a baby boy entered the world. His first cry echoed through the room. Nomsa immediately burst into tears. The nurse carefully placed the tiny child into her arms. "Congratulations, he's healthy." Nomsa stared at the sleeping face before her. Small fingers, soft curls, tiny nose. Perfect. Completely perfect. "What will you call him?" the nurse asked. Nomsa smiled through exhausted tears. "Lethabo." The nurse smiled. "A beautiful name." Hope. That was exactly what Lethabo meant, because hope was the only inheritance Nomsa could guarantee her son. Meanwhile, life inside the Dlamini Empire continued, or at least it appeared to. Sanele expanded into new international markets. Construction projects multiplied. Awards filled his office. Business magazines placed him on their covers. Financial commentators described him as unstoppable. Yet none of those achievements brought satisfaction. Every success felt strangely empty. His engagement to Ayanda Maseko quietly collapsed less than a year after Nomsa left. Ayanda confronted him one evening. "You haven't been present for months." "I'm busy." "No." She shook her head. "You're haunted." Sanele remained silent. She studied him carefully. "You're thinking about her." He didn't answer. That silence became his answer. Ayanda removed her engagement ring and placed it on the table. "I deserve someone whose heart is actually here." She walked away without another word. Sanele never tried to stop her. He knew she was right. The following years brought even more losses. His closest financial advisor secretly accepted bribes from competitors. A trusted executive manipulated company accounts. Several relatives demanded larger shares of family assets despite contributing nothing. Each betrayal reminded him of something he could never fully explain. People he trusted kept leaving. One person he had abandoned never left his thoughts. Sometimes late at night, he found himself standing outside the unused servants' quarters. The room where Nomsa had once stayed remained exactly as it had been. He had instructed no one to renovate it. No one understood why, not even Sanele himself. 5 years slipped by. Lethabo grew into an extraordinary child. By the age of 5, he already surprised teachers with his curiosity. He loved mathematics. He asked endless questions. He shared his lunch with classmates who forgot theirs. If another child cried, Lethabo was usually the first to comfort them. His teachers often told Nomsa, "He's different," not because he was the smartest, because he possessed unusual kindness. Nomsa smiled every time she heard those words. Kindness mattered more than intelligence. At home, life remained difficult. Money was still scarce. Bills still arrived. Thandi's health still required regular treatment. But laughter had returned. Lethabo filled the tiny apartment with joy. Every evening he raced into Nomsa's arms, shouting, "Mama!" The exhaustion of the day disappeared instantly. One Sunday afternoon, while helping his grandmother water small potted plants outside their apartment, Lethabo looked up curiously. "Gogo?" "Yes, where's my father?" The watering can stopped. Thandi looked toward Nomsa, who had heard the question from inside the doorway. For a long moment, silence settled between them. Nomsa slowly walked outside. She knelt beside her son. "Your father." She chose each word carefully. Made a very painful mistake." Lethabo blinked. "Does he know me?" "No." "Is he a bad man?" Nomsa closed her eyes briefly. She remembered the man who had helped save her mother's life. Then she remembered the man who had watched her walk through those gates alone. Finally, she answered, "I don't know." Lethabo accepted the answer with surprising peace. "When I grow up," he said softly, "I hope he isn't lonely." Nomsa stared at her little boy in amazement. Most children would have spoken with anger. Lethabo spoke with compassion. In that single moment, she realized something extraordinary. Although Sanele had abandoned his son before birth, he had not succeeded in passing down bitterness. Love had been stronger. Far across Johannesburg, inside an office overlooking the city, Sanele stood alone before the glass windows. For reasons he could never explain, he suddenly felt an overwhelming emptiness, as though, somewhere, someone important was thinking about him. 5 years had a way of changing everything without asking permission. Johannesburg's skyline had grown taller. New office towers reflected the African sun. Highways stretched farther into the suburbs, and neighborhoods once forgotten were slowly finding new life through community projects. The Dlamini Group had become one of the continent's most respected companies. Its founder, Sanele Dlamini, had become even wealthier. Yet those closest to him noticed something strange. Success no longer made him happy. Every award ceremony ended the same way. He smiled for photographs. He thanked investors. He shook hands with politicians. Then he returned to his empty mansion, where silence greeted him more faithfully than any person ever had. His staff often noticed him standing alone on the upstairs balcony after midnight, looking toward the city lights as though searching for something that could no longer be found. One Monday morning, his executive assistant entered his office carrying a folder. "Sir, your schedule for Saturday." Sanele looked up. "Anything unusual? The Johannesburg Children's Hope Foundation invited you to their annual community outreach event." "I almost declined." The assistant hesitated. "They're opening a new education center in Soweto." Sanele skimmed through the invitation. Normally, he avoided public charity events unless they directly involved his foundation. Too many became opportunities for photographs rather than genuine service. Then, one sentence caught his attention. "Special reading day with local children." He paused. When does it begin? 10 in the morning. He closed the folder. I'll attend. Saturday arrived beneath a clear blue sky. The community center stood in the middle of a modest Soweto neighborhood surrounded by colorful murals painted by local teenagers. Unlike luxury charity galas held in expensive hotels, this event felt genuine. Children laughed while painting pictures. Volunteers served sandwiches. Teachers organized games beneath large trees. Parents chatted comfortably on folding chairs. No one cared about expensive suits. They cared about their children. Sanele walked through the entrance, accompanied only by one security officer. He had intentionally left the larger entourage behind. Today was not about business. It was about listening. The director of the center welcomed him warmly. "We're honored you're here. The honor is mine." Sanele replied sincerely. As they toured the classrooms, children excitedly waved at visitors. Some recognized the famous businessman from television. Others simply saw another adult. That difference made Sanele smile. Near the reading corner, several young children sat in a circle while volunteers handed out storybooks. One little boy immediately caught Sanele's attention. Perhaps 6 years old. Bright brown eyes. Short, natural curls. A calm confidence unusual for someone so young. Instead of rushing toward the front like the others, he quietly helped a younger girl pick up books she had accidentally dropped. Only after making sure she had everything did he return to his own seat. Sanele watched without realizing it. The director noticed. "That's Lethabo. He comes here almost every weekend. Very polite child. What are his parents like?" The question slipped out naturally. The director smiled. "His mother is remarkable. Raises him alone. She works incredibly hard. And his father?" The director's smile faded. "No one here has ever met him." Something stirred inside Sanele. He couldn't explain why. The reading session began. Volunteers invited several guests to read stories aloud. One teacher approached Lethabo. "Would you like to choose today's reader?" The boy looked around carefully. Then, to everyone's surprise, he walked directly towards Sanele. Sanele crouched to meet his eyes. "Yes. My teacher says visitors sometimes read stories. Would you read ours?" The request was so innocent that Sanele couldn't refuse. "I'd be honored." Children gathered around as he opened the picture book. His voice, usually firm during board meetings, became unexpectedly gentle. He gave different voices to different characters. He laughed when the children laughed. Even the volunteers exchanged surprised glances. None had expected one of Africa's busiest billionaires to sit cross-legged on the floor reading children's stories. Lethabo listened with complete attention. Every now and then he asked thoughtful questions. Why did the lion forgive the rabbit? Because forgiveness made him stronger, Sanele answered. Lethabo nodded seriously. My grandmother says something similar. What does she say? She says angry hearts stay heavy. Several adults quietly smiled. After the reading ended, the children moved outside for games. Lethabo remained behind, gathering scattered books. Sanele instinctively began helping him. You like keeping things organized? Lethabo grinned. My mother says, if everyone cleans a little, no one has to clean a lot. Sanele chuckled. Your mother sounds wise. She is, the boy answered proudly. She works all the time. So Gogo and I help. What does your mother do? Lots of things. Lethabo counted on his fingers. She cleans offices. Sometimes cooks. Sometimes sews clothes. Sometimes helps old people. Sanele felt an unexpected admiration. She must be very hard-working. The hardest. Lethabo answered without hesitation. Before Sanele could continue, another volunteer called the children outside. "Football time!" Lethabo's face lit up. He turned back towards Sanele. "Will you watch?" "I will." For the next 30 minutes, Sanele stood beside the field watching neighborhood children chase an old football across uneven grass. Lethabo wasn't the fastest player, nor the strongest. Yet he constantly passed the ball to teammates instead of trying to score himself. Whenever another child fell, he stopped to help them stand before continuing the game. Leadership, compassion, patience. Qualities Sanele had spent years trying to teach young executives. This little boy displayed them naturally. The final whistle blew. Children rushed toward tables filled with sandwiches and fruit. As Lethabo accepted his lunch, he noticed another smaller boy sitting alone nearby without food. Without hesitation, Lethabo split his own sandwich into 2 equal pieces. "You can have mine." The younger child smiled gratefully. "Thank you." "It's okay. We can both eat." Sanele watched the entire exchange. Something tightened painfully inside his chest. Why did this child feel so familiar? It wasn't simply the physical resemblance. There was something deeper. The calm eyes, the quiet kindness, the instinct to protect others before himself. The qualities reminded him painfully of someone he had tried for years to forget. Suddenly, another volunteer approached Lethabo. "Your mother's here." The boy's face brightened instantly. "Mama." He sprinted across the courtyard. Sanele turned instinctively. Time seemed to stop. Standing near the entrance, holding a worn canvas handbag, wearing a simple light blue dress, was Nomsa. She looked older, a little thinner. Life had left quiet marks around her eyes, but her gentle smile remained exactly the same. She opened her arms. Lethabo ran straight into them. She lifted him effortlessly despite the long day of work. "I missed you. I missed you more." The little boy laughed. Then he noticed Sanele standing nearby. "Mama." He waved excitedly. "The man who read us stories." Nomsa slowly looked up. The smile disappeared from her face. Her eyes met Sanele's across the courtyard. Neither moved. Neither spoke. 5 years of silence stood between them. Lethabo happily grabbed Nomsa's hand. "You should thank him." Nomsa walked forward slowly. Every step felt impossibly heavy. When she finally stood before Sanele, she offered a small, polite nod. "Thank you for spending time with the children." Her voice was calm, respectful, but completely different from the warmth he once knew. "It was my pleasure," Sanele answered quietly. His eyes drifted toward Lethabo, then back to Nomsa. For a brief moment, the resemblance struck him with overwhelming force. The shape of the boy's smile, the determination in his eyes, even the way he tilted his head while listening. Something inside Sanele whispered a truth his mind refused to accept. As Nomsa prepared to leave, Lethabo waved enthusiastically. "Goodbye, Mr." Sanele forced a smile. "Goodbye." He watched them walk away hand in hand. The little boy chatted excitedly while Nomsa listened with patient affection. Neither looked back. Only after they disappeared beyond the community center gates did Sanele realize something astonishing. For the first time in 5 years, he had felt genuinely alive, and for reasons he could not explain. He could not stop thinking about that little boy. For the rest of the weekend, Sanele could think of little else besides the boy named Lethabo. He tried to convince himself it was only coincidence. Many children resembled their parents. Many boys had warm brown eyes, curious smiles, and quiet manners. Yet something about Lethabo refused to leave his thoughts. It was not merely his appearance. It was the way he listened before speaking, the way he instinctively cared for others. The way his calmness reminded Sanele of someone he had once known better than he deserved. On Monday morning, Sanele arrived at headquarters earlier than usual. His executive assistant noticed immediately that something was different. "You didn't bring any reports. I'll read them later. You have the investment committee in 30 minutes. I know." Instead of walking toward the conference room, Sanele stopped beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Johannesburg. "Tell me something." The assistant looked surprised. "Yes, sir. Do you ever wonder what your life would have looked like if you had made one different decision years ago?" The assistant hesitated. "I think everyone wonders that sometimes." Sanele nodded slowly. "Go prepare the meeting." When the assistant left, Sanele remained motionless. For years he had trained himself never to dwell on the past. Regret solved nothing. Action solved everything. At least, that was what he had always believed. Now, for the first time, he was beginning to question whether some mistakes demanded to be faced rather than forgotten. The board meeting passed in a blur. Executives discussed expansion into East Africa. Financial projections filled giant screens. Lawyers debated contracts. Normally, Sanele noticed every detail. Today, he barely heard a word. During a coffee break, his longtime legal advisor, Advocate Bekizizwe Nkomo, quietly approached him. "You seem distracted." "I am." "Business?" "No." The older man smiled. "That usually means it's something more important." Sanele gave a faint laugh. "I met someone." The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't aware you were dating." "I'm not. It's complicated." Advocate Nkomo had worked with Sanele for almost 15 years. He rarely offered personal advice unless invited. This time he spoke carefully. "Some questions become heavier the longer we refuse to ask them." The sentence lingered in Sanele's mind. That afternoon, he made a decision he had resisted for 5 years. He asked his assistant to locate the community center from Saturday's event. "I'd like to make a donation." The request sounded ordinary. No one questioned it. The following day, Sanele visited the center without cameras, journalists, or security teams beyond one driver waiting outside. The director welcomed him warmly. "We weren't expecting you again so soon. I wanted to see the education programs more closely." The statement was true, just not completely true. As they toured the classrooms, Sanele casually asked, "The little boy who helped distribute books?" "Lethabo." "Yes." "He seems like an exceptional child." "He truly is." The director smiled proudly. "He volunteers, even though he's still so young." "His teachers say he naturally looks after younger children." Sanele hesitated. "And his mother? Nomsa is one of the strongest women I've ever met." The director's expression became thoughtful. "I've never heard her complain." "Not once." "She works several jobs. Sometimes she arrives here after cleaning offices all night. Yet she still finds time to help other parents." Sanele listened silently. The words unsettled him. Nomsa had every reason to resent the world. Instead, she continued serving it. She never remarried. The director shook her head. "No, people have asked. She always says her son deserves peace more than she deserves another relationship." Sanele looked toward the empty playground outside. His chest tightened. The director continued. "She also refuses financial donations unless they're meant for community programs. Several people have tried helping her directly. She politely declines. She says other families need it more." Every sentence deepened Sanele's guilt. 5 years earlier, he had convinced himself she might use him for money. Now he was hearing story after story about a woman who refused money even when she desperately needed it. That evening, he sat alone in his office, long after everyone else had gone home. He opened an old storage box he had not touched in years. Inside were personal items from different stages of his life: his father's watch, his mother's handwritten recipes, university notebooks. Among them lay a small photograph. It showed the household staff celebrating Christmas years earlier. Nomsa stood near the back, laughing with his kitchen employees while carrying trays of food. Sanele remembered that day. She had insisted every employee eat together before serving the guests. No one should celebrate while someone else stays hungry. She had said it so naturally that everyone simply agreed. He stared at the photograph for several minutes. How had he forgotten so many moments that revealed exactly who she was? The next morning, Sanele visited someone he had not spoken to in years: the former head butler, Mandla Nkube. Mandla had retired shortly after Nomsa left the estate. The elderly man now lived quietly with his wife on the outskirts of Johannesburg. When Mandla opened the front door, surprise spread across his face. "Mr. Dlamini." "It's been a long time." "It has." Mandla welcomed him inside. After tea was served, Sanele came directly to the point. "I want to ask about Nomsa." The old butler remained silent for a moment. "I wondered how many years it would take." "You knew." "I knew enough." Sanele leaned forward. "Tell me." Mandla sighed deeply. "I never believed she lied." "Neither did most of the staff." Sanele frowned. "Why didn't anyone say something?" "We tried." Mandla answered quietly. "But after she left?" He looked into his teacup. "People were afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Your aunt." The room became still. Sanele's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Mandla chose his words carefully. "Nothing happened in that house without Mazanelle knowing. She decided which employees stayed, which suppliers were trusted, which visitors reached you." He paused. "Even which letters arrived on your desk." Sanele felt a chill run through him. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I often saw important documents disappear. You should investigate. Don't take my word for it. But don't ignore it either." For the first time in years, Sanele felt genuine suspicion. Not toward Nomsa, toward someone he had trusted all his life. Before leaving, he asked one final question. "If you had one thing to tell me," Mandla looked directly into his eyes, "I would tell you that the woman you sent away never once spoke badly about you." Sanele lowered his head. "Not once. Never. Whenever someone criticized you, she defended you." Mandla's voice softened. "She always said, 'Pain makes good people do terrible things.' And she hoped one day you'd find peace." Those words struck Sanele harder than any business failure ever had. She had protected his name, even after he destroyed her life. Driving back to the city, Sanele barely noticed the traffic. His thoughts raced. If Mandla was right, if documents had disappeared, if Mazanelle had controlled what reached him, then perhaps the story he had believed for 5 years had never been the truth at all. That night, he walked into the silent mansion with new eyes. For years, he had considered it a symbol of success. Now it felt like a place filled with unanswered questions. As he climbed the staircase, he noticed Mazanelle standing in the upstairs hallway. She smiled warmly. "You're home late." "Yes." "Everything all right?" Sanele looked at her for a long moment. Then he answered calmly, "I've started remembering things." For the first time in many years, the smile on Mazanelle's face faded almost imperceptibly. Sanele Dlamini had always believed that patience was more powerful than force. For decades she had survived by staying one step ahead of everyone else. She never raised her voice. She never threatened people openly. She simply removed obstacles before they became problems. It had worked her entire life. Until now. The morning after his conversation with Mandla Ncube, Sanele arrived at company headquarters, carrying a question he could no longer ignore. Had he destroyed an innocent woman's life because someone else had quietly manipulated him? The thought refused to leave him. He summoned his chief of internal security, a meticulous former police investigator named Vusi Mthembu. "I need your complete discretion." Vusi nodded. "You have it. I want every archived household record from 5 to 6 years ago. The estate, everything. Visitor logs, security footage, employee files, mail records, medical correspondence. Nothing is too small." Vusi looked surprised. "Is there a legal issue?" "Not yet." Sanele's voice hardened. "But there may be." Within hours, a small investigative team began reviewing thousands of archived files. Most of the records revealed nothing unusual. Cleaning schedules, maintenance invoices, routine deliveries, staff attendance. Days passed with little progress. Meanwhile, Sanele found himself unable to focus on business. Every report reminded him of another report he should have questioned years earlier. Every signature reminded him how easily trust could be abused. Late one evening, Vusi entered his office carrying a thin folder. "We found something." Sanele immediately stood. "What is it?" "A gap." "What kind of gap?" "The estate archives are incomplete." He opened the folder. Several months of incoming correspondence disappeared. "Only from your private residence." "Not from company offices." Sanele frowned. "Could they have been destroyed?" "They weren't accidentally misplaced," Vusi answered. "Someone removed them deliberately." Sanele felt his heartbeat quicken. "What else?" "The security system recorded unusual access to the document archive." "Who entered?" "The access code belonged to—" Vusi hesitated. "Sanele Dlamini." Silence filled the office. For a long moment, Sanele simply stared at the file. "No," he whispered. "There has to be another explanation." "We considered that," Vusi replied carefully. "But her access appears repeatedly. And always after important deliveries." Sanele closed the folder. "I want proof. Not suspicion. Proof. We'll continue." 2 days later, another breakthrough arrived. An elderly records clerk from Mill Park Hospital contacted Vusi after hearing investigators were searching for old administrative documents. "I found something unusual," the clerk explained. She produced a digital backup of appointment confirmations from 6 years earlier. One record immediately caught Vusi's attention. Patient Nomsa Khumalo. Appointment authorized by Mr. Sanele Dlamini. Status confirmation delivered by private courier. Yet, according to household archives, no such confirmation had ever reached Nomsa. The courier's delivery receipt showed the package had been signed for inside the Dlamini estate. Signature M. Dlamini. Sanele stared at the scanned document in disbelief. His hands trembled. "This appointment, it was for Nomsa's mother." Vusi nodded. "The documents never left the estate." Someone had intercepted them. Someone had deliberately prevented Nomsa from receiving information that Sanele himself had arranged. His chest tightened painfully. It was no longer speculation. Someone had manipulated events. But that same afternoon, another unexpected visitor arrived. Jabulani Ndlovu, the restaurant owner who had once employed Nomsa. He had learned through community contacts that investigators were asking questions about her past. After confirming his identity, Vusi brought him to Sanele's office. Jabulani entered cautiously. "You wish to speak with people who knew Nomsa." I did. Sanele gestured toward a chair. Thank you for coming. I only came because this concerns her. Sanele nodded. I understand. Jabulani remained silent for a moment. Then he asked directly, Why now? The question struck harder than expected. Sanele answered honestly, Because I think I made the greatest mistake of my life. Jabulani studied him carefully. Finally he spoke. When Nomsa worked for me, she was already heavily pregnant. People often asked where the father was. What did she say? Very little. Sanele lowered his eyes. Did she ever ask anyone for money? Jabulani laughed softly. Money. She refused overtime bonuses unless every employee received one. If customers offered large tips, she shared them with the kitchen staff. He shook his head. I've never met anyone less interested in taking advantage of others. Every sentence felt like another accusation against Sanele's past decisions. Jabulani continued. The night she went into labor, she apologized. Sanele looked confused. Apologized. She believed she was creating inconvenience by leaving work early. He smiled sadly. Imagine that. A woman about to give birth, apologizing. Sanele closed his eyes. The image shattered something inside him. After Jabulani left, Sanele remained alone. For hours. As darkness settled outside, memories returned one after another. Nomsa helping elderly staff carry groceries. Nomsa protecting family photographs during the storm. Nomsa refusing special treatment. Nomsa declining his money when he dismissed her. How had he ever believed she would lie? The answer came immediately. Because fear had spoken louder than truth. The following morning, Vusi entered again. This time, he said quietly, we found exactly what you asked for. He placed a small flash drive onto the desk. What is it? Recovered security footage. The original server automatically created encrypted backups. The main files were deleted, but one fragment survived. Vusi connected the drive. The grainy video appeared. Date: 6 years earlier. Location: private document archive inside the Dlamini estate. The timestamp showed late evening. The footage revealed Sanele entering the archive carrying several envelopes. She looked around carefully, then opened one. Inside lay hospital documents. Another envelope contained handwritten correspondence. The video showed her removing several papers before placing the remaining envelopes back into storage. Minutes later, she carried the removed documents into her private sitting room. The recording ended. No audio existed. Yet no explanation could erase what Sanele had just seen. His own aunt, the woman who had raised him, had secretly removed documents meant for Nomsa. He leaned back slowly. His face had become completely pale. Vusi broke the silence. We searched Sanele's private storage room this morning. You had legal authority after viewing the footage. What did you find? Vusi handed him another folder. Inside lay photographs. Burned document fragments recovered from an old fireplace. Partially destroyed hospital records. Pieces of handwritten notes. One photograph stopped Sanele's breathing. It showed half of a letter written in Nomsa's handwriting. Only part of it remained readable. I never wanted anything except for you to know the truth. The rest had been burned. Sanele's hands began shaking uncontrollably. She had written to him. He had never seen the letter. Another photograph showed fragments of medical reports confirming pregnancy dates. Enough remained to prove one thing. Nomsa had never attempted deception. Everything pointed toward the same conclusion. Sanele had systematically hidden every piece of evidence that might have led Sanele back to Nomsa. Not once, repeatedly, over months, for years. The office became unbearably quiet. Finally, Sanele whispered, "Why?" Vusi answered carefully, "We found financial records." Sanele looked up. Large transfers from family trust accounts, all controlled by Mazanele. She appears to have believed any child born outside the family's approved marriage could threaten future inheritance. Everything suddenly made sense. Not love, not protection, control, money, power. Those had been her true motivations all along. Sanele slowly stood. His expression no longer reflected confusion, only devastation. "I condemned an innocent woman." His voice cracked. "I abandoned my own child." No one answered. There was nothing left to say. Outside the office windows, Johannesburg continued its ordinary day. People hurried through busy streets. Children walked home from school. Life moved forward. Inside that silent room, a billionaire finally understood that the greatest loss of his life had never been money, business, or reputation. It had been 6 years stolen from a woman who never stopped believing in goodness, and from a son who had grown up without ever knowing his father. Sanele did not sleep that night. He remained in his office until dawn, surrounded by folders, photographs, and recovered documents that had completely shattered the story he had believed for 6 long years. The evidence was undeniable. Nomsa had never lied. She had never manipulated him. She had never tried to take his money or destroy his reputation. Instead, she had protected his name while raising their son alone. Every sacrifice had been hers. Every failure had been his. As the first sunlight crept across the office floor, Sanele picked up the old photograph of the household staff once more. His eyes settled on Nomsa's smiling face. "I'm sorry." The words barely escaped his lips. "I failed you." No one heard him, yet for the first time in years, he spoke without hiding behind pride. At 8 o'clock sharp, he instructed his assistant to cancel every meeting for the day. The investment conference? Cancel it. The television interview? Cancel it. The shareholders' luncheon? Cancel everything. The assistant had never heard Sanele speak with such finality. Within minutes, the building buzzed with confusion. Investors complained, executives protested, journalists demanded explanations. Sanele ignored them all. There was only one meeting that mattered. 1 hour later, he walked into the Dlamini estate carrying a folder beneath his arm. Mazanele sat comfortably in the breakfast room, reading the newspaper as though nothing had changed. She smiled warmly. "You're home early." Sanele placed the folder on the table. "We need to talk." She folded the newspaper. "You sound serious." "I am." He opened the folder without sitting down. Several photographs slid across the polished wooden table. Hospital records, security images, courier receipts, fragments of burned letters. Mazanelle's smile disappeared. She stared silently at the evidence. "You searched my private room." "I searched for the truth." Several long seconds passed. Then, surprisingly, she sighed. "So? You finally know?" There was no denial, no shock, only quiet acceptance. Sanele's voice trembled. "Why?" Mazanele looked directly at him. "Because I protected this family." "You destroyed it." "I saved it." She answered firmly. "You don't understand how wealthy families survive." "They survive through honesty," Sanele replied. "They survive through control," she corrected. "If people believe they can enter this family whenever they choose, everything your parents built disappears. Nomsa never wanted our money." "How do you know?" "I know because she refused it." Mazanele laughed bitterly. "Poor people refuse money all the time. They simply wait for more." Sanele shook his head slowly. "You never knew her." "I knew enough." "No." His voice grew stronger. You never even tried. For the first time in decades, Sanele's confidence began to crack. I raised you, she whispered. I sacrificed my own life after your parents died. I loved you. I know. Sanele answered quietly. And because I loved you, I believed every word you said. He paused. You used that trust as a weapon. The older woman's eyes filled with tears. They would have ruined you. No. Sanele shook his head. I ruined myself. Silence settled over the room. Finally, Sanele asked the question she feared most. What happens now? Sanele took a deep breath. You will resign from every position connected to my businesses. She closed her eyes. You would humiliate your own aunt. I won't humiliate you, he answered calmly. You'll receive everything you're legally entitled to. You'll keep your home. You'll receive your pension. But you will never again make decisions for this family. She stared at him. And if I refuse? Sanele slid one final document across the table. The police have already reviewed the evidence. Her hands began trembling. He continued quietly. I'm choosing mercy, not because you deserve it, but because my parents taught me compassion. Tears rolled down Sanele's face. For years, she had believed herself invincible. Now she realized she had lost everything that truly mattered: respect, trust, family. Sanele turned and walked away without another word. He felt no victory, only sorrow. By afternoon, news spread rapidly throughout the company. Senior executives learned that Sanele had resigned for personal reasons. Most accepted the official statement. A few longtime employees quietly understood the truth. None celebrated. Scandals always left wounds. That evening, Sanele drove alone to Soweto. He carried no security team, no lawyers, no reporters, only a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. He parked several streets away from the modest apartment where Nomsa lived. From a distance, he saw her through the open window. She sat at a small table helping Lethabo with homework. The boy frowned thoughtfully at a mathematics problem. Nomsa smiled patiently. Try again. I can't. You can. She gently tapped the notebook. I believe you. A few moments later, Lethabo solved the problem. I did it. I knew you would. Nomsa laughed. The sound drifted through the evening air. Sanele stood frozen beside his car. He realized something painful. He had imagined meeting his son thousands of times over the years. Never once had he imagined watching from outside like a stranger. Because that was exactly what he was. A stranger. He remained there nearly 20 minutes before finally gathering enough courage to approach the front door. His hand hovered over the bell, then stopped. What right did he have to interrupt the peaceful life they had built? None. He quietly placed the envelope inside the mailbox instead, then walked away. Inside the apartment, life continued normally. Nomsa prepared dinner while Lethabo set the table. After eating, the little boy volunteered to check the mailbox. Mama. He ran back inside carrying the envelope. It doesn't have a stamp. Nomsa looked confused. She slowly opened it. Inside lay a single handwritten letter. No money, no legal documents, only words. Her hands trembled as she began reading. Nomsa, I have spent 6 years believing lies because I chose fear over trust. Nothing I write can erase the pain I caused you. I now know the truth. I know you never deceived me. I know our son grew up without his father because of my weakness. I am not asking for forgiveness. I have no right. I only ask for one opportunity to apologize face to face. If you refuse, I will understand. If you never wish to see me again, I will accept that too. Whatever happens, Thank you for raising the child I abandoned. You became the parent both of us should have been. I am deeply ashamed. Sanele. By the time Nomsa reached the final line, tears blurred every word. Lethabo looked up with concern. Mama. She quickly folded the letter. It's nothing. But children often sensed emotions adults tried to hide. Are you sad? Nomsa looked at her son, then slowly shook her head. No. She smiled through tears. I'm remembering something. What? She gently pulled him into her arms. That even broken people, she whispered softly, can sometimes find the courage to tell the truth. Across the city, Sanele sat alone inside his car. He had no idea whether Nomsa would ever answer, no idea whether she had already thrown the letter away. For the first time in years, he understood something that wealth could never purchase. Forgiveness was not something he could earn with money. It would have to be earned through a lifetime of changed actions. And even then, she might never give it. He finally accepted that possibility, because true repentance expected nothing in return. 3 days passed, then 4, then an entire week. Sanele checked his mailbox every evening after returning from work, even though he told himself he expected nothing. No letter came. He checked his phone countless times, despite knowing Nomsa did not have his personal number anymore. No message appeared. He found himself staring at the entrance of his office whenever footsteps approached, imagining for a brief second that someone might announce she was waiting downstairs. No one ever did. The silence was painful. Yet, unlike the silence 6 years earlier, this one had been earned. He accepted it. Every morning before leaving for work, he reread the copy of the handwritten letter he had kept. Not to remind himself of guilt, to remind himself of responsibility. One Monday morning, his executive assistant entered with a thick folder. The board wants approval for the annual charitable budget. Sanele opened it absent-mindedly. Millions of rand had already been allocated to scholarships, hospitals, and environmental projects. Everything looked generous. Everything looked impressive. Yet suddenly, it also felt incomplete. He closed the folder. How many shelters for single mothers do we currently support? The assistant looked surprised. Only one directly. How many women does it serve? Around 30 families. Sanele leaned back thoughtfully. And how many need help in Gauteng alone? The assistant hesitated. Tens of thousands. Sanele nodded slowly. Then we've been thinking too small. Over the following days, the company watched its chairman become more personally involved in community work than ever before. Instead of merely signing donation approvals, Sanele visited shelters himself. He met social workers. He listened to mothers who had escaped abusive relationships. He sat beside women raising children alone after being abandoned. Many stories reminded him painfully of Nomsa. One afternoon, he visited a community housing project funded by the Dlamini Foundation. A young mother carrying an infant approached him. Mr. Dlamini. He smiled politely. Yes. I just wanted to thank you. What for? This apartment. She looked around proudly. My daughter finally has a safe place to sleep. Sanele glanced toward the little girl sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. Then he asked quietly, Did the father help? The woman smiled sadly. No. But that's all right. She kissed the child's forehead. She still has me. Those words followed him all day. That evening, he made another decision. I want the foundation expanded. He instructed his board. Not by 10%, by whatever amount is necessary. Several directors exchanged surprised looks. What exactly do you have in mind? Sanele stood and walked toward the presentation screen. I want free childcare centers connected to our housing projects. I want vocational training, legal assistance, healthcare, scholarships for children of single parents. One director frowned. This will cost hundreds of millions. Sanele answered calmly, so be it. Another executive asked, why the sudden change in priorities? Sanele looked around the room. For years, he said quietly, I believed charity meant giving people money. He paused. I've learned it means giving people opportunities they should never have lost. No one argued again. Meanwhile, across the city, Nomsa's life continued much as before. She still worked long hours. She still repaired clothing for neighbors during weekends. She still carefully planned every expense. The only difference was the letter. She had read it dozens of times, not because she was deciding whether to forgive Sanele. She already knew forgiveness was possible. What she did not know was whether trust could ever be rebuilt. Late one evening, Thandi noticed the folded letter resting on the kitchen table. You've been reading it again. Nomsa nodded. What does your heart say? Nomsa remained silent for a long time. Finally, she answered, my heart says he regrets everything. And my memory says regret doesn't erase 6 years. Thandi reached across the table and gently squeezed her daughter's hand. Both things can be true. Nomsa sighed. I don't know if I can let him into Lethabo's life. You don't have to decide today. That answer brought unexpected relief. She had been treating forgiveness as though it required an immediate decision. Perhaps it didn't. Perhaps healing moved at its own pace. A few days later, Lethabo returned home unusually excited. Mama, what happened? We had visitors at school. Really? He nodded enthusiastically. They're building a new science library. Nomsa smiled. That's wonderful. Our teacher said a businessman is paying for everything. She continued preparing dinner without thinking much about it. Then Lethabo added, his company is called Dlamini Group. The knife in Nomsa's hand stopped moving. What did you say? Dlamini Group. Our teacher said they also promised new computers. Nomsa stared quietly at the vegetables on the cutting board. She knew immediately who had made that decision. Sanele. Yet the project had been announced anonymously. His name appeared nowhere on the posters. He wasn't seeking recognition. He was simply helping. The realization unsettled her. Months earlier, she would have assumed it was another public relations campaign. Now, she wasn't so sure. That Saturday, the community center organized a volunteer day to renovate a playground. Nomsa arrived early with Lethabo. Dozens of local residents painted benches, planted flowers, and repaired playground equipment. Around mid-morning, several black pickup trucks quietly pulled into the parking lot. Workers unloaded the construction materials. Behind them walked Sanele. He wore faded jeans, work boots, and a plain navy shirt. No expensive suit, no photographers, no television crews, just work gloves hanging from one shoulder. Several volunteers recognized him immediately. Others did not. Instead of giving speeches, Sanele picked up a shovel and began helping install new fencing around the playground. Children watched curiously. One little girl approached him. Mister. Yes, you're doing the heavy work. He smiled. So are you. She giggled before running away. For the next 4 hours, Sanele worked alongside teachers, parents, and volunteers. He carried lumber, mixed cement, planted trees, shared sandwiches during lunch, never once mentioning who he was. Nomsa observed quietly from across the playground. This wasn't the man she remembered from boardrooms, nor was it the frightened man who had sent her away. Something inside him had undeniably changed. Lethabo, meanwhile, spent most of the afternoon following Sanele from one task to another. Can I help? Sanele handed him a small paintbrush. You can paint that fence. Lethabo worked with complete concentration. Half an hour later, he proudly announced, I didn't spill any. You did excellent work, Sanele replied. The little boy beamed. As the project finished, volunteers gathered for a group photograph. Lethabo stood between Sanele and Nomsa without realizing the quiet significance of the moment. Afterward, everyone began leaving. Sanele approached Nomsa slowly. I wasn't expecting to see you. She answered honestly, neither was I. A brief silence followed. Then Sanele spoke. I wanted you to know. He glanced toward Lethabo, who was chasing butterflies nearby. The school project wasn't because of you. Nomsa looked confused. I know. It was because children deserve opportunities. She nodded. I believe you. Those 3 simple words caught him completely off guard. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation. Just one small acknowledgement that she believed his motives. It was the first piece of trust she had offered in 6 years. Sanele did not try to ask for more. He simply smiled. Thank you. As he walked away, Lethabo ran after him. Mr. Sanele turned. The boy held out a tiny packet of sunflower seeds. Our teacher gave everyone one. He grinned. I think you should plant yours. Sanele accepted the packet carefully. I will. Why? Lethabo smiled with the simple wisdom only children sometimes possess. Because good things grow. If someone is patient enough to water them. Sanele watched the little boy run back to his mother. For the first time in many years, hope no longer felt impossible. Spring slowly gave way to summer, and with it came the busiest season the Dlamini Group had experienced in over a decade. A multinational consortium announced plans to invest billions of rand into a large, affordable housing and renewable energy development across southern Africa. Winning the contract would secure thousands of jobs and transform entire communities. Losing it would damage the company's reputation for years. At first, everything appeared to be progressing smoothly. Negotiations advanced. Government approvals arrived. International banks expressed confidence. The board celebrated what seemed like another inevitable success. Then, almost overnight, everything collapsed. 3 major investors withdrew simultaneously. An anonymous report accused the Dlamini Group of manipulating environmental assessments. Social media exploded with criticism. Television stations questioned the company's integrity. Within 48 hours, the company's stock lost nearly 20% of its value. Employees panicked. Competitors celebrated. News anchors repeatedly asked the same question. Has Sanele Dlamini finally lost control? Inside headquarters, emergency meetings continued day and night. Senior executives argued endlessly. One blamed the legal department. Another blamed public relations. Several proposed suing journalists. Others demanded immediate layoffs to calm investors. The conference room became a battlefield of fear. Sanele listened quietly, then asked one simple question. Has anyone actually discovered where this report came from? Silence. No one had. Everyone had focused on defending the company. No one had investigated the truth. Vusi Mthembu, now serving as Sanele's head of corporate security, entered midway through the meeting. We've traced the original document. Every head turned toward him. It wasn't created by environmental experts. Who wrote it? A consulting company that exists only on paper. Who owns it? Vusi placed another folder on the table. The ownership leads through 3 shell companies. He paused. The final beneficiary appears connected to... Everyone waited. One of our former senior executives. The same executive who had secretly accepted bribes years earlier. Although dismissed, he had quietly built relationships with foreign competitors, seeking to weaken the Dlamini Group. The revelation stunned the board. One director slammed his fist onto the table. "We should sue immediately." Another added, "We need a media campaign." A third demanded, "Destroy them before they destroy us." Sanele remained calm. "No." The room fell silent. "No. We'll answer with facts." One executive frowned. "Facts don't move markets." "They move truth," Sanele replied. But despite his confidence, one enormous problem remained. The company still lacked key documentation, proving that every environmental commitment had actually been fulfilled. Those records should have been organized months earlier. Instead, administrative failures had scattered them across multiple regional offices. Recovering everything before the government review seemed almost impossible. For the next several days, hundreds of employees worked around the clock. Boxes of files filled conference rooms. Digital archives crashed under constant demand. Everyone searched desperately, yet important pieces remained missing. Late Friday evening, exhausted after another 16-hour shift, Sanele drove home through Soweto instead of taking his usual route. He needed silence. As he waited at a traffic light near the community center, he noticed familiar faces. Volunteers were preparing for a neighborhood weekend market. Without thinking, he parked nearby. The community hall buzzed with activity. Local women arranged handmade crafts. Teenagers decorated stalls. Parents organized food tables. Near one corner of the hall, Nomsa carefully coordinated dozens of volunteers. She carried a clipboard, assigned responsibilities, solved small disagreements, encouraged discouraged workers. No one questioned her authority. She never demanded it. She earned it naturally. Sanele watched quietly. An elderly volunteer approached Nomsa. "The donation inventory doesn't match." Nomsa smiled. "Let's count everything again." "We already counted twice." "Then we'll count a third time." Half an hour later, they discovered the mistake. Nothing had been stolen. 2 boxes had simply been placed in the wrong storage room. The elderly volunteer laughed. "You always say panic comes before patience." Nomsa smiled. "And patience usually finds the answer." Those words echoed inside Sanele's mind. Suddenly, he remembered something. Years earlier, during a household inventory at the mansion, Nomsa had reorganized an entire storage room after noticing supplies constantly disappeared, not because of theft, but because no one knew where anything had been placed. She possessed an unusual talent. She saw order where others saw chaos. The next morning, Sanele made an unexpected decision. He visited the community center again. Nomsa looked surprised. "You came back." "I need help." She stared at him. "I don't understand. It isn't personal." He answered honestly. "It's business." Nomsa folded her arms. "I'm not a business consultant." "I know. But you're one of the most organized people I've ever met." She couldn't help smiling slightly. "That's a strange compliment." "It's an honest one." He explained the documentation crisis, the missing files, the impossible deadline, the growing confusion. Nomsa listened carefully without interrupting. When he finished, she asked only one question. "Have you mapped where every document should exist before searching for where it actually is?" Sanele blinked. "No." "Then everyone is searching randomly." She knelt on the floor beside a large sheet of paper used for children's art activities. With a marker, she quickly drew a simple chart. "Every document has a beginning," she explained, "a journey, and a destination. If you trace the journey first, the missing pieces become easier to find." Sanele stared at the diagram. It was remarkably simple, yet none of his highly paid executives had suggested it. "Would you—" He hesitated. "Come explain this to my team." Nomsa looked uncertain. "I haven't worked in an office for years." You understand systems. That's what matters. After several moments, she nodded. I'll help, but only because the project builds homes for families, not because of us. Sanele smiled gratefully. That's more than enough. Monday morning, executives exchanged confused glances as Nomsa entered headquarters, wearing a modest gray blouse and carrying only a notebook. Several people recognized her. Whispers spread immediately. Sanele ignored them. He simply introduced her. This is Ms. Nomsa Khumalo. Please give her your full attention. Some executives looked skeptical. A former housemaid advising senior management. The idea seemed absurd. Nomsa walked calmly toward the whiteboard. She drew the same chart she had created at the community center, then quietly began asking questions. Where is every document created? Who receives it first? Who verifies it? Where is it copied? Who archives it? One by one, employees answered. Within an hour, patterns emerged. Within 2 hours, missing links became obvious. Within 4 hours, teams located nearly every required file, not because Nomsa possessed secret knowledge, because she organized confusion into logic. The legal director stared at her in amazement. We've spent a week searching. You solved the structure before searching. Nomsa smiled. My mother used to say, if your kitchen is organized, you'll always know where the salt is. Laughter filled the room. For the first time in days, tension disappeared. By Wednesday, the government review concluded successfully. Independent inspectors publicly confirmed the Dlamini Group had fully complied with environmental regulations. News outlets quickly corrected their earlier reports. Investors returned. The company's value rebounded. During the emergency board meeting, one director stood. We owe today's success to Ms. Khumalo. Others nodded in agreement. Sanele turned toward Nomsa. You saved this company. She shook her head gently. No, I simply reminded people how to work together. After the meeting ended, Sanele walked beside her toward the elevator. I spent years believing wealth made people valuable. He said quietly, I was wrong. Nomsa looked at him. Worth was never measured by money. He nodded slowly. I know that now. As the elevator doors opened, Lethabo unexpectedly came running through the lobby with his grandmother. His school class had been invited to tour the company's new education center. Seeing Sanele, he smiled brightly. Mister, he hurried over. Our teacher says you built the science lab. Sanele smiled. A lot of people built it. Lethabo looked up proudly. My mama helped your company today. Sanele glanced at Nomsa. She certainly did. Lethabo grinned. I knew she would. Children often believed the people they loved could accomplish anything. Standing there surrounded by employees who now looked at Nomsa with admiration instead of prejudice, Sanele realized the greatest lesson of his life. The woman he had once considered unimportant had just rescued an empire that money alone could never have saved, and for the first time, everyone else finally saw her the way he should have seen her from the very beginning. The crisis should have ended when the government cleared the Dlamini Group of wrongdoing. Instead, it opened a much larger door. Journalists wanted to know how the company had recovered so quickly. Investors wanted explanations. Employees whispered about the mysterious woman who had entered headquarters with no corporate title and helped solve a problem senior executives could not. Within days, Nomsa's name began circulating beyond the company. Sanele refused every request to discuss her. She helped us privately, he told his communications team. We will respect her privacy, but one question could no longer be avoided. The Dlamini Foundation's annual charity gala was approaching. Hundreds of business leaders, journalists, government representatives, employees, and community organizers would attend. The event had originally been designed to announce the foundation's expansion into housing and education programs for vulnerable families. Now the media expected Sanele to address the recent scandal as well. His advisors prepared a careful speech. It praised employees, reassured investors, celebrated community partnerships, mentioned nothing personal. Sanele read it twice, then placed it aside. "This isn't the speech I'm giving." His communications director looked alarmed. "Sir, every sentence has been legally reviewed." "I know. Then what's wrong with it?" "It's safe." The director stared at him. "That's usually the objective." Sanele shook his head. "Safety is what created my greatest mistake." That evening, he drove to Soweto. Nomsa was outside the community center, helping pack donated school supplies when he approached. She noticed the envelope in his hand. "What's that?" "An invitation." She opened it. "The charity gala." Nomsa immediately shook her head. "Sanele, you don't have to come." "Then why invite me?" "Because the programs being announced serve people whose struggles you understand better than anyone in that ballroom." She looked at him carefully. "Is this about us?" "No," he answered, "but there is something I intend to say." Nomsa's expression changed. "What?" "The truth." Her eyes narrowed. "Which truth?" "All of it." She became completely still. "No." Sanele looked surprised. "No. You don't get to turn my pain into a public confession just because you're ready to speak." The words struck him immediately. She was right. He lowered his head. "I didn't think about it that way. That was my life." She continued. "My pregnancy, my humiliation, my son. If the world learns everything, Lethabo has to live with that too." Sanele nodded slowly. "You're right." He took the invitation back. "I won't mention anything without your permission." Nomsa studied him. Years earlier he would have defended himself. Now he simply listened. That mattered. She remained silent for several moments, then asked, "Why do you want to tell them?" "Because people still think I'm the man on magazine covers," he answered. "They see the foundation, the company, the awards. They don't see what arrogance and fear once made me do." Nomsa looked away. Sanele continued, "I don't want sympathy. I want responsibility." A long silence followed. Finally, Nomsa spoke. "If you tell the truth, don't make yourself the victim." "I won't." "Don't blame your aunt for everything." He nodded. "I won't." "You made your own decision." "I know." "And protect Lethabo." "Always." Nomsa looked at the invitation again, then quietly took it from his hand. "I'll think about coming." 3 nights later, Johannesburg's Grand Heritage Convention Center glowed beneath hundreds of lights. Luxury vehicles arrived continuously. Photographers crowded the entrance. Inside, elegant tables surrounded a massive stage. Executives wore tailored suits. Community leaders wore colorful traditional clothing. Teachers, nurses, social workers, and ordinary families sat beside some of the wealthiest people in Africa. Sanele had insisted on that arrangement. No separate tables based on status, he had told the organizers. If we're discussing equality, we should practice it. Minutes before the ceremony began, he stood backstage. His communications director approached. "Final speech." She handed him the approved pages. Sanele accepted them, then folded them and placed them aside. "I'm speaking without them." She looked terrified. "Please don't surprise the legal team." For the first time that evening, Sanele smiled. "I probably will." The ceremony began. Several speakers discussed education, housing, and healthcare. Videos showed communities transformed by foundation projects. Then the host introduced Sanele. Applause filled the hall. He walked onto the stage. From the podium, he scanned the audience. Then he saw her. Nomsa sat near the back beside Thandi and Lethabo. She had come. Sanele took a breath. "Tonight," he began, "I was supposed to speak about success." The room quieted. "But I think we talk too much about success." A few people exchanged curious looks. "We celebrate people when they build companies, when they become wealthy, when their names appear in newspapers, but we rarely ask what kind of human being they became along the way." The atmosphere changed. Sanele continued. 6 years ago, I failed that test." Nomsa's fingers tightened around her handbag. Lethabo looked toward the stage. Sanele did not look away. "A woman worked in my home. She was honest, hardworking, kind. When she became pregnant with my child..." Gasps spread through the hall. Camera shutters exploded. Sanele continued. "I became afraid. Afraid of scandal. Afraid of judgment. Afraid of losing control. So I doubted someone who had given me no reason to doubt her." Nomsa's eyes filled with tears. "I sent her away." The hall became completely silent. "Other people manipulated information," he continued, "but I will not hide behind that. I made the final decision. I abandoned her, and I abandoned my son before he was even born." Lethabo stared at the stage. Slowly, understanding appeared on his young face. He looked toward Nomsa. "Mama." She gently took his hand. Sanele's voice trembled. "For years, I thought wealth meant having enough power to control what people saw. I was wrong. Real strength begins when you stop hiding what you're ashamed of." He looked directly toward Nomsa. "I will not ask this woman to forgive me tonight. I will not ask my son to call me his father. Those are gifts I have not earned." Tears appeared in Sanele's eyes, but I will say their names with respect. Nomsa Khumalo. He paused, and Lethabo Khumalo. "They are not my scandal. They are the people I failed." Nomsa covered her mouth as tears fell. Sanele stepped away from the podium. "I cannot change 6 years ago, but I can decide what kind of man stands before you today." For several seconds, nobody moved. Then an elderly woman from one of the foundation's housing programs stood. She began clapping. A teacher joined her. Then a nurse. Then employees. Within seconds, the entire hall rose, not because Sanele was a billionaire, not because he had confessed perfectly, but because a powerful man had finally stopped protecting his reputation and accepted responsibility. Sanele looked toward the back of the room. Lethabo slowly stood. He did not clap immediately. Instead, he stared at the man on stage. Then the little boy raised his hand and gave a small wave. Sanele's composure finally broke. He smiled through tears and waved back. Nomsa watched them both. The wounds were still there. The lost years had not returned. But for the first time, truth stood between them instead of lies. And sometimes, healing did not begin when pain disappeared. It began when nobody was hiding from it anymore. The morning after Sanele's confession, Johannesburg seemed determined to talk about nothing else. His face appeared across television screens, newspapers, business websites, and social media. Some commentators praised his honesty. Others accused him of trying to repair his reputation through public emotion. Several investors questioned whether such a personal confession belonged at a corporate charity event. Others argued that accountability was precisely what powerful people were usually unwilling to show. Sanele read almost none of it. For the first time in his career, public opinion no longer determined his next move. There were more important people whose opinions mattered. Nomsa, and Lethabo. He did not call them. He did not send flowers. He did not arrive at their home asking for forgiveness. Instead, he waited. 3 days later, his phone rang. An unfamiliar number appeared. "Hello." Silence. Then a small voice answered. "Mr. Dlamini." Sanele immediately recognized it. Lethabo. "Yes." His heart began pounding. "How did you get my number?" "Mama gave it to me." Sanele closed his eyes. That detail alone meant more than the child could understand. What can I do for you?" Lethabo hesitated. "Are you really my father?" There was no gentle way around the truth. "Yes." "Why didn't you want me?" Sanele felt something break inside him. He sat slowly. "I didn't know you yet, but I knew Mama was carrying you." He swallowed. "And I was afraid." "Of me? No. Never of you. I was afraid of what people would say about me." Lethabo became quiet. Sanele continued. "I made a terrible decision because I cared more about protecting myself than protecting you and your mother." "That's not fair." "No," Sanele whispered. "It wasn't." Another silence followed. Then Lethabo asked, "Are you sorry?" "Every day." "Can sorry fix it?" Sanele closed his eyes. "No." "Then what can—" "I don't know," he answered honestly. "But if you allow me, I can spend the rest of my life trying to become someone you can trust." Lethabo thought carefully. "Okay." Sanele almost stopped breathing. "Okay. You can start." The call ended a few minutes later. Sanele remained seated long afterward. No business contract had ever meant more. No award had ever felt greater. A 6-year-old boy had given him something money could never purchase. A beginning, not forgiveness, not yet, just permission to try. The months that followed were slow, exactly as healing needed to be. Sanele began visiting Lethabo every Saturday. Sometimes they went nowhere special. They played football at the community center, built model airplanes, read books, shared sandwiches beneath the jacaranda trees. At first, Lethabo continued calling him Mr. Dlamini. Sanele never corrected him. He understood that fatherhood was not a title biology automatically granted. It was a relationship built through presence. Nomsa remained cautious. She watched every promise, every arrival, every goodbye. Sanele never came late, never canceled because of business, never used expensive gifts to buy affection. When Lethabo wanted a new bicycle, Sanele almost purchased the most expensive one available. Nomsa stopped him. "He doesn't need the best bicycle." Sanele smiled. "What does he need?" "Someone who teaches him how to ride it." So that was exactly what he did. One Saturday afternoon, Sanele spent nearly 3 hours running behind Lethabo's second-hand bicycle. "Don't let go." "I won't." "You promise?" "I promise." Eventually, Sanele quietly released the seat. Lethabo continued riding without realizing it. When he finally looked backward and discovered Sanele several meters behind, his eyes widened. "I'm doing it." "You are!" Sanele shouted. Lethabo circled back, jumped from the bicycle, and wrapped his arms around him. For one brief second, Sanele froze. Then he hugged his son tightly. "Thanks, Dad." The word came naturally. No ceremony, no dramatic announcement. Just one small word spoken by a happy child. Sanele turned his face away so Lethabo would not see the tears. Nomsa saw them from across the playground. Something inside her finally softened, not because she had forgotten. She never would. But because Sanele had stopped asking the past to disappear. He was learning to live responsibly beside it. A year passed. Nomsa accepted a permanent position with the Dlamini Foundation, not because Sanele offered it, but because the board independently recognized her work. She became Director of Community Operations. Her practical understanding transformed programs across Gauteng. Shelters became training centers. Training centers connected women with employment. Childcare programs allowed mothers to work without leaving children unsafe. Scholarships helped teenagers from struggling families continue their education. Nomsa insisted on one principle. Don't rescue people, she told staff. Give them the tools to rebuild their own lives. The foundation grew rapidly, not because it spent the most money, because it listened. Meanwhile, Sanele changed the structure of his businesses. Independent oversight committees were created. Family influence was reduced. Employees received protected channels for reporting misconduct. Senior executives were evaluated not only on profits, but also on ethics. Sanele had learned painfully that institutions became dangerous when powerful people could act without accountability. Sanele remained outside the family business. Months after the gala, she wrote him a letter. She did not ask for her position back. She apologized. Not perfectly, but sincerely enough for Sanele to recognize the beginning of remorse. He visited her one Sunday afternoon. They drank tea. Neither pretended nothing had happened. Forgiveness, Sanele had learned, did not require pretending. It required truth. Years passed. Lethabo grew taller. Thondi's health stabilized. Saifo eventually earned an engineering scholarship and became the first university graduate in the Khumalo family. And slowly, without forcing anything, Nomsa and Sanele rediscovered friendship, then trust, then something deeper. There was no sudden marriage proposal, no grand romantic gesture. Their relationship rebuilt itself through ordinary moments, morning conversations, school events, hospital appointments, shared meals, arguments followed by apologies, promises kept. One evening, years after Nomsa had walked through the gates of the Dlamini estate, carrying one suitcase and an unborn child, she returned there with Lethabo. Sanele stood near the entrance. He looked toward the iron gates. I hate those gates. Nomsa smiled faintly. They're just gates. No. He shook his head. They remind me of the worst decision I ever made. Nomsa looked at him for a long moment, then stopped, remembering only what left through them. Sanele frowned. What do you mean? She reached for Lethabo's hand. Look at what came back. Sanele's eyes filled with tears. He finally understood. Healing had never meant restoring the life they should have had. That life was gone. Healing meant building something honest from what remained. He opened the gate himself. Nomsa walked through beside him, not as a maid, not as a woman seeking acceptance, but as an equal. Lethabo ran ahead, laughing. Sanele watched his son disappear into the garden, then turned toward Nomsa. Thank you for forgiving me. She gently shook her head. I forgave you a long time ago. Trusting you again. She paused. That was the difficult part. Sanele nodded. I know. Above them, the evening sky stretched across Johannesburg in shades of gold and blue. Once Sanele Dlamini believed wealth meant possessing enough money to protect himself from loss. Now he understood something far more valuable. Money could build mansions, it could buy companies, it could open doors, but it could never purchase trust, erase cruelty, replace lost years, or force forgiveness. Those things required something harder: humility, patience, accountability, and love proven through action. For the first time, the enormous Dlamini mansion no longer felt empty, not because everyone had forgotten what happened there, but because truth had finally been allowed to live inside it. There are moments in life when an apology feels too small for the damage that has been done, and sometimes it is. Words cannot return lost years. Money cannot erase humiliation. Regret cannot magically heal someone who had to survive the consequences of another person's fear. But this story reminds us that while the past cannot be rewritten, the person who caused harm can still choose what they become afterward. Sanele's greatest mistake was not simply abandoning Nomsa. It was allowing fear, pride, and social status to become more important than another human being's dignity. His wealth gave him enormous power, yet it could not protect him from the emptiness created by his own choices. Nomsa's strength was different. She survived without allowing suffering to turn her cruel. She protected Lethabo from bitterness, rebuilt her life through honest work, and eventually forgave without surrendering her self-respect. That distinction matters. Forgiveness does not mean pretending something never happened. Healing does not mean allowing someone to hurt you again. And second chances should never be demanded. They should be earned. Sometimes justice means consequences. Sometimes it means truth finally being spoken. And sometimes the deepest form of justice is watching someone who was once treated as insignificant rise with dignity, while the person who underestimated them learns humility. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments. Could you have forgiven Sanele after everything Nomsa endured? And what does true forgiveness mean to you? Please like and share this story with someone who may need its message today, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories about family justice, hope, and second chances. Because people can make terrible mistakes. But when remorse becomes responsibility, when words become actions, and when pride finally gives way to humility, even a deeply wounded life can begin to heal.